Hey y'all, Leela with mskisskreations. Welcome back to my channel. Today's tutorial, I'll be showing you how I created this glittered ombre plaid tumbler. Like always, all of my materials will be listed in my description below, including some direct links and coupon codes. Now, before I get started, I want to explain something to y'all. This tumbler was a absolute mess to create. I had so many problems with this tumbler, and to be honest, I'm not really satisfied with the final result. There were so many hiccups, but I just kept going and going, and I said, I'm gonna create this, I'll do this video, and when I'm done with this video, this tumbler is getting stripped. It might look nice and pretty from where you are seeing it now, but once I explain all of my mistakes and where I struggled, you'll see how just better I can do in the future. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and finally start with this tutorial. I'm using a 40-ounce tumbler I purchased from Amazon. Link will be in my description. I plan on removing this handle, so I traced the handle with a mechanical pencil, and I just did this because I don't want to put glitter where the handle is going to be placed back down. It's not going to lay flush, so that's why I traced around it so I don't add glitter or anything around that area. You do not have to remove your handle. I wanted to do this because my handle was a different color. Usually when I do 40 ounces, I do not remove my handle, and it's perfectly fine. I just treat it as a regular handled tumbler, but I wanted to try something different. Shame on me, right? Then I wipe my tumbler down with 91% alcohol. I usually sand my tumblers, but since this is powder coated, I did not sand this tumbler, and I just wiped it down with 91% alcohol. I'm going to start applying my vertical pieces of tape around the tumbler. This is going to be my plaid template basically. I use a 1-inch size tape, so I am using painter's tape. I tried 1 inch, 3/4 of an inch, 1.5 inches, and 2 inches of tape size. And I always go back to my 1-inch tape size. I first start by placing the tape where the handles are, because that's obviously the most difficult place to lay the tape, so I figured that would be a good starting place. So what I typically do is lay 3 pieces of tape down and pull the middle tape, and then every other one you pull, and then voila, it's perfectly templated. But in this case, this tumbler was not mathing up. One, I didn't do any math. You're probably wondering, why didn't you just do the math, divide it, and then blah, 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 blah. Well, because I'm a simple gal, okay? I just lay tape down and I peel up the middle, and that's the template. Well, this was not working out. No matter how many times I placed this tape, whichever side or whatever, it wasn't evened. It drove me crazy. These vertical lines, like every time I peeled it, you'll see I peeled that up right here. I'll show you on the camera right there. It never is, like, there's always 2 pieces together. It drove me insane. So to save you guys the hassle, I had a brilliant idea that's probably not that brilliant, but instead of placing lines on my tumbler, I placed tabs. So I cut a square out with my painter's tape, and I placed basically small squares on top. That way I kind of peeled up the middle. It was the same concept. You'll see once I finish laying everything down. I thought this was a good idea to save on materials, and also I can adjust the tape pieces a lot easier than if it was one long piece of tape. Again, if you don't want to go through this hassle, measure this, cut out pieces of vinyl, and put vinyl stripes on here, but I like a challenge, right? So I placed all my tabs of tape on the top of the tumbler, and then I peeled every other one up, and I used the middle one as kind of a spacer or a template. You can see that those 2 are together. So then I basically eyeballed it and adjusted it. Then I took my measuring tape, and then I tried to measure around the tumbler, each space around the tape, spaces between the tape. Does that make sense? So I'm a really good eyeballer. So I eyeballed it and then I measured it. Again, you can measure in the beginning and save all this hassle, but I thought this is a good idea. And when I do my vertical lines in the future, I'm always going to do it this way because it's going to save me a lot more time than peeling up a whole line rather than just peeling up a little tiny square on top of the tumbler. Once I added my vertical lines to the tumbler, I then added my horizontal lines, and I'm doing it the same way as I did my vertical lines. I'm placing the small pieces of tape down for kind of like a guideline, and then I'm removing every other piece of tape. Once I had that down, I then removed the small tape and then added my actual line around the tumbler. This actually turned out very well, and it was very easy to do because the math was mathing. So again, this is your plaid template. Once you're finished with this plaid template, it will look like a checkerboard. You can also purchase a plaid template from Etsy. I know there's a lot of templates online, or you can even create one your own. Just get your dimensions off your cup and then create it in Silhouette or Design Space. Once you add your tape to the tumbler, make sure you are pressing down the tape to the tumbler very well, because you don't want any paint to go underneath there. So I decided to add a final line on the bottom. It was a little crooked at first, but I ended up fixing it. So if you want to bring your plaid all the way down to the smaller part of your tumbler, you can do this as well. So I'm pressing down around the tape because I want to make sure that it's nice and snug, because we will be adding paint to these squares, so you don't want any paint to go underneath the tape. I am using 2 colors of glitter from Glitter Heart Co. I'm using Chili Pepper, which is the red, and Black Cat, which is the black. I do have a 10% off code, MSKISS, for 10% off your order at glitterheartco.com. I am using 2 glitters, but I am making a 3rd glitter. The way I make the 3rd glitter is I add the red and the black together, and it creates a medium shade. The way I'm adding my glitters to my tumbler is I'll be using Adhesive Apothecary's Cauldron Colors. I'm using Breaking Dawn, and I also have my 10% off code, MSKISS, for 10% off of your order from adhesiveapothecary.com. So I placed my paint in a painter's tray. It's a lot easier to paint this tumbler this way because I am going to be painting these small squares, and I'm using a 1-inch paintbrush. Now this tumbler looks complicated, but I promise the plaid section really is not that hard. You're going to start with one color. People say to start with the darkest color first, but I start with the lightest color. So I just grabbed red, and every single square that's exposed, you are going to paint red and then add your glitter to the tumbler. If you are using Mod Podge or any other type of adhesive that might dry quicker, I recommend you painting one square, adding the glitter, and then painting another square, adding the glitter, basically going square by square. I just did about 3 squares at a time, and then I really took my time around the handle, because remember, I had a trace around the handle to make sure I don't get any glitter or epoxy underneath the handle, or the handle won't be sitting flush at the very end. This paint that I'm using, Adhesive Apothecary's Cauldron Colors, is a paint primer and adhesive, and it is perfect for this specific project, and a 1-inch paintbrush really did well with this job, especially since it was the flat paintbrush. Once all of my glitters were placed on the tumbler, I then remove my horizontal tape. So I placed the horizontal tape on last, so that's how I know that's the tape that I'm removing. It's the tape that's on top. So if you are confused on what tape to remove first, make sure you are removing the tape that's on top or the tape that you placed on last. For my next coat, I will be placing the mixed color on the exposed squares. I decided to use the red paint because, well, it's red and black glitter mixed. And so if you are seeing some red behind it, it's not going to look tacky and it's going to blend well. Remember, this is the glitter that I created myself. So this is a mix of the red and black glitter. And you really want to take your time with this. And what I felt most importantly to really focus on during these steps are the corners. Since you do have, well, at least I have a cream tumbler, I wanted to make sure that that square was fully painted and fully covered with glitter, because I did not want to have any of the cream sticking out behind the glitter in the paint. I had to use a smaller paintbrush for the handle areas, and I thought it turned out really well. Once I was finished placing the glitter on those areas, I then peeled up my vertical pieces of tape and very slowly peeled them up. I did not wait until the paint's dried. I peeled this tape up immediately. It's easier to peel up tape whenever paint is still wet than whenever it's dried for a couple minutes or even a couple hours. Now this part is the fun part for me because I really like freehand painting. I'm just really not good at it. This really helped using a 1-inch paintbrush for this step. So that 1-inch paintbrush really did help because I had basically 1-inch by 1-inch squares. Some of them were a little bigger, some of them were a little smaller, but having that flat paintbrush really did help with this process because you see that I'm freehanding this area. And this was actually really fun to do. It was very calming. It did take a lot of time, but I think it turned out really pretty, and hopefully all of them are even. Now for this glitter placement, I'm not only placing the mixed color glitter, but I'm also placing the black glitter on these squares. This is the part that tends to confuse people and scares them away from plaid because 1, you're not only freehanding, but 2, you have to make sure you're placing the glitter down right, or the plaid is not going to look like a true authentic plaid design. So a good way that I explain this, at least it makes sense in my head, is if you pull up a picture of a plaid design on Google, you will see a solid color. So my solid colors for this design is the red and the black. The mixed color is the two mixed colors together. If you find any solid color square on your design, so let's start with a solid red, the colors that are left, right, up, and down of the red are a mixed color. So if you look at a black solid color, the colors that the squares to the left, the square to the right, the square above that color, and the square on the bottom of the color is a mixed color. So any solid color you see, the colors around that solid color will be a mixed color. So I hope that makes sense. So even if that did not make sense and that was just like gibberish to you, that's still okay. All you have to do is pull up a picture of a plaid design, and if it's even easier for you, pull up a picture of a plaid tumbler design, even a glitter tumbler design, and just match that pattern. Just have the picture up on your screen or on your phone and match the pattern as you're doing this tumbler. But like I said, it's very simple if you break it down the way that I explained it in my mind. So right now I'm doing all of the black areas. So all the squares that are exposed, I'm now going in with black. So again, like I said, if you look at any solid color, so right now I'm doing a black, if you look around that black square, top, bottom, left, and right, it's a mixed color. So that's how in my mind, if I'm multitasking and doing this, then it helps me focus on where the colors go. So as I was working around the handle, I placed the handle back on the tumbler and I used my big paintbrush and then my smaller paintbrush to add some paint and then glitter, just so I don't have part of that tumbler exposed. Once I was finished with that area, I'm moving on to the bottom of the tumbler. You don't have to place a base glitter on your tumbler, but I wanted to. I am using a fine glitter champagne toast, and I'm using Elder from Adhesive Apothecary to apply the glitter to the bottom. My idea was to have a glitter ombre-ish tumbler. So what I did was I wanted a fine glitter on the bottom, and then I would add the chunky glitter over the fine. Again, if you want to just add the chunky glitter, you can, but I find that it's a nice little hack if you have the fine glitter placed down first and then you add the chunky glitter later, so you don't have to add as much chunky glitter on the tumbler. And if you add more chunky glitter on the tumbler, then you're going to risk your tumbler being bumpy and not as smooth once you do your final coats of epoxy. After I added my fine glitter on the bottom, I started to look at my tumbler and I really wanted to make the rim gold as well. I initially wanted to keep the rim silver, but silver and gold to me, it just did not work. So I used my 1-inch paintbrush and I just added a little bit of the paint around the rim. I took my time, I didn't tape anything off. Using that sharp, flat paintbrush really does help with this. And then I added the glitter on the tumbler just as I did the bottom. Once my glitter was placed on my tumbler, I took my tumbler outside and I sprayed two coats of Krylon crystal clear acrylic coating around the tumbler. I sprayed 2 generous coats. Once I'm finished spraying the coats, you want to make sure this Krylon crystal clear acrylic coating is completely dried before moving on to epoxy. If your acrylic coating, whatever coating you use to seal your glitter, you want to make sure it is completely dried. So once I finish spraying my tumbler, I let that dry for about 20 to 25 minutes. I then add my handle to my tumbler. You can always paint and glitter your handle while it's still unattached from your tumbler, but I wanted to challenge myself, of course, right? And make this more difficult. So I decided to screw it back on my tumbler and then paint my handle while it's on my tumbler. Why did I unattach it? I don't know. So I'm painting Elder back on the handle, and then I'm going to add my champagne toast around my tumbler again. Once I was finished adding my glitter to my handle, I went outside and I resprayed my tumbler with my Krylon crystal clear acrylic coating for a 3rd time. I wonder at this point of the video if you're wondering, Leela, this tumbler looks great. Why are you so frustrated with it? Well, let me tell you. Remember when I said to make sure to let your Krylon crystal clear or any coating that you will be using to seal your glitter dry before applying your epoxy? Yes, you want to make sure it is completely dried. I don't know if in my mind I sprayed more than what I thought. Well, I know I sprayed more than what I thought. Or if I just ran out of patience for this tumbler because of the plaid design. But I sprayed my tumbler again with my Krylon crystal clear acrylic coating. And I thought I only sprayed my handle, but I guess I sprayed my entire tumbler. And I probably sprayed more than what I should have. And I did not let this dry. So if you do not allow your sealer to dry, your epoxy is going to go on your tumbler foggy. So if you're wondering why my tumbler is foggy, it's because I did not let my sealant dry. At this point, I thought about stripping this entire tumbler and redoing it, but I thought I would add this in the video and remind you guys that make sure you are taking your time with these tumblers and you're letting your drying time really be your drying time and don't rush it like I am. So at this point, I'm doing the handle first. I am using 50 mLs of epoxy, so that's 25 mLs part A and 25 mLs part B, totaling 50 mLs of epoxy. I'm using Flynn Sister Supply Shop epoxy, and I'm using my Fast Set epoxy because I want to get this tumbler over with. I do have a 10% off code, MSKISS, for Flynn Sister Supply Shop that will cover 10% off your entire order of whatever you purchase on her website. And you want to really make sure that you're taking your time with this handle, because if you add too much epoxy on this handle in one area, whenever you or your customer grabs the cup, they're really going to notice the unevenness. So that's why I turn off my tumbler. I do a very thin coat of epoxy on my handle first. I really take my time coating my handle, and then I turn on my turner and then I apply more epoxy around the tumbler. My handle actually turned out really pretty in my opinion, I think. I didn't realize that I sprayed too much or I didn't let my sealer dry enough. At this point, I really started noticing it whenever I started applying my epoxy to the plaid area. I think maybe because I had so many different colors and the design had to be so crucial, like had to be so not mixed. I was very anal about adding extra acrylic coating than I normally would. Also, while I was adding my epoxy to my tumbler, my camera battery died, so I wasn't able to record everything. My camera cuts out soon, so you will not see all of my epoxy mess, which is probably a good thing. It was probably like the crafting gods like protecting me, because this is a hot mess. So once I'm finished applying this coat of epoxy to my tumbler, again, I'm using my fast set, I come back to my tumbler in about 4 to 6 hours, and it is a hot mess. I really contemplate just, again, never even showing anybody this video or even showing off this tumbler, but hopefully throughout my craziness with this tumbler, you guys still pick up the design and the technique, and you guys create something gorgeous. So I will see y'all whenever this ugly tumbler's epoxy is nice and cured. So here's my tumbler whenever it's been cured. My epoxy's cured, and what I didn't show y'all because my camera died is when I realized that my acrylic coating wasn't dried completely, I was scraping off my epoxy. So that gave me an uneven tumbler because I noticed that the tumbler was very foggy. So I figured if I scraped off the foggy spots, then I could save it a little bit. I don't know if I saved it. So then I went in with 15 mLs of epoxy, and again I am using my fast set epoxy. That's 7.5 part A and 7.5 part B. All I wanted was to seal in the areas that either was exposed with glitter or the areas that weren't even and smooth. My goal was to just even out this tumbler and to fix it and to try to make it as smooth as possible and not have any glitter exposed. So I let this spin on the cup turner for about 2 to 3 hours, and then I came back to it after about 6 to 8 hours. As my tumbler was turning, I went to my Cricut design space and I cut out my rectangles. I made my rectangles 0.6 inches by 12 inches long, and you can see that that gold vinyl was giving me a hard time, so I just ignored that part. And then I started placing my rectangles on my cured epoxy tumbler. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to place my lines, my vertical lines black, and then my horizontal line silver. This is when you can really have fun with this tumbler because you can add different color lines. You can make all the lines the same color, or if you don't have a Cricut, you can not add lines at all. So there's plenty of plaid tumblers that don't have the pinstripe lines, and that's okay. I figured if I added the pinstripe lines, then it would really clean up my tumbler, because when I added epoxy to it, my squares weren't as crisp as I wanted them to be, and I was still seeing the fogginess, so I thought the lines would help, but it didn't. It didn't help at all. And another side note, I know I'm known for like doing straightforward tumbler tutorials, but like this one is just a hot mess. So I've done so many little side rants and I have not been to the point for this tutorial, so I do apologize, but I really hope you guys are having a good time, because even though this tumbler is a hot stinking mess, we're here for a good time, and I'm currently having a wonderful time. Once I was finished adding my pinstripes to my plaid design, I decided to add a black pinstripe down the middle of my handle because I thought it would really tie the tumbler together, but now that I'm looking at the tumbler without the handle pinstriped, I actually like it without the pinstripe. But, you know, I had an extra pinstripe, and how can I make this tumbler even worse than what I already did? So add your pinstripe, don't add your pinstripe, whatever you want to do. And you can also add more pinstripes down your handle in a horizontal way. I think that would be really cute, but I just ran out of patience at this point with this cup. I also want to mention another thing. If you are a new watcher or a new follower of my videos, I'm usually not this negative in my videos. I am usually very positive about my work, and I really am excited to make tumblers. I just needed my moment for this tutorial, so I'm just venting a lot to y'all. After I placed all of my pinstripes on my tumbler, I went right into adding my chunky glitter to the bottom. I am using Social Light and Shooting Star from Glitter Heart Co. I decided to mix these colors together because I want to make this more complicated than easy. I like the holographic hue, and I also like the deep gold of one, so a nice little mixy mix. I applied these glitters using Mod Podge and a Wet n Wild makeup brush, and I placed my Mod Podge around the gold area and also towards the plaid area and on top of the plaid area. I then took my gold chunky glitter and I slowly placed the glitter on the tumbler, creating that nice cascade effect. I really didn't need to place a lot of the glitter on the gold part because I have that gold background, so keep that in mind. Once I applied the glitters to the tumbler, I went right in with parchment paper and I pressed down around the tumbler. That way I am pressing down those glitters to the tumbler. The more pressed down those glitters are, the more even your tumbler is going to be once you apply your coats of epoxy. Once I was finished pressing down my tumbler, I took my tumbler outside and sprayed it with one coat of my Krylon Crystal Clear acrylic coating, and yes, I did let it dry for at least 25 minutes before moving on to my next step, which is epoxy. This is almost my last coat of epoxy, but it's not my last coat. This coat of epoxy is placed on the tumbler to seal in the glitter and the vinyl. So I am adding about 15 mLs of epoxy, so 7.5 part A and 7.5 part B, totaling 15 mLs of epoxy. I would rather have a thinner coat of epoxy placed on my tumbler than a thicker coat. Also, side note, I did spray the entire tumbler with my Krylon Crystal Clear acrylic coating to seal in that vinyl so that vinyl wouldn't lift while I applied my epoxy. Once I was finished applying this coat of epoxy, I then added another coat of epoxy, which was my final coat of epoxy, and again, that was 15 mLs of epoxy total. So I applied 2 thinner coats of epoxy for my 2 final coats of epoxy for this tumbler. And I did not use Fast Set, I used my regular set epoxy from Flynn Sister Supply Shop. Once that tumbler was cured, I then took my tumbler off the turner and I used my X-Acto knife and I cut around the rim of the tumbler, removing any of the excess epoxy. Once I was finished cutting the excess epoxy, I then washed my tumbler out and then I placed my lid on my tumbler, and man, did it make this tumbler look even worse. Like, I don't know why I chose a cream colored lid. Like, why didn't I choose a red tumbler or a black tumbler? I just think the cream just clashed. Anyways, this is the final tumbler and I thought it turned out really nicely, but not really. So I really hope you guys had a good time with this video. I did not have a good time making this, but I had a good time making the voiceover. If you guys did enjoy this video, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to follow me on my YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.